I'll now request you all to bring in your energies for a very interesting plenary session for the day, the second plenary on privacy at the core of digital business, overhauling architecture, design, compliance, monitoring, and governance. For this, we have a power-packed panel of leaders, with the speakers for the session being Ms. Shannon Koh, Director, Global Data Policy, U.S. Department of Commerce, Mr. Srinivas Pusarla, Senior VP and Global Chief Privacy Officer, Infosys, Mr. Vishal Salvi, CEO, Quick Heal Technologies, and Mr. Vinayak Godse, CEO, DSCI. Can we please put our hands together and welcome our panelists on stage?
In the 3 days of this conference and this summit, we had been dwelling into subject of privacy from various different perspectives, and this session that we would like to dwell that until now we have dealt with a lot of disciplines as a IT or security professional, but privacy is a little different, and we try to dwell in that, why privacy is different, and in the digital business ecosystem, why the privacy should be at the core, and we know the obligations and liabilities, but that's one part of it basically, right? And to dwell into this subject of why the correlation between the digitization and digitalization business and privacy is important, and for that to happen, what needs to be done basically, right? So we would like all of these three participants, the speakers here, Shannon, Srinivas, and Vishal, to take that initial 2, 3, 4 minutes about your views as an opening remark in terms of the imperatives of privacy for the digital business and digital economy and overall digital world that we talk about. So we'll start with Vishal, then Shannon and Srinivas.
Good afternoon.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's okay. So you can start with it. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. So my name is Shannon Koh. I'm at the International Trade Administration at the U.S. Department of Commerce. So I'm here representing a government perspective. And why, you may ask, is a trade policy person speaking at a data privacy conference? And the simple answer is that data privacy, data security is a significant digital trade issue. And it has been since I started in this role 8 years ago. And it's even more important now as data privacy regulations have proliferated all over the globe. Now almost every country has a data privacy law. So what does this mean for businesses? So I'm here today to talk about the US approach and to facilitating data flows in this increasingly complex and uncertain environment. So the United States has long promoted the trusted free flow of data and an open internet with strong and effective protections for privacy. And we continue to work with partners around the world to enable the trusted free flow of data on a global scale, including through a new global initiative that we launched in 2022 called the Global Cross-Border Privacy Rules Forum, or the Global CBPR Forum. The Global Forum is an important venue for cooperating with countries on data privacy policy and issues. Why, you may ask, is international cooperation important? Excuse me. The simple answer is that cooperating with other countries to agree on consistent standards and a cooperative framework is important for building trust and enabling cross-border data flows. And trust is really at the heart of data privacy and data flows. Trust is established through understanding the rules in other jurisdictions, how they are similar, how they are different through our own. It's established also through facilitating cooperation of privacy regulators to enhance their ability to address privacy violations, no matter where they happen. It's also established through building frameworks to ensure companies are accountable for processing data according to the rules. And regarding data flows, as I mentioned already, the global regulatory landscape has become increasingly complex. And we can expect our companies, especially our smallest companies, to benefit from the potential of the digital marketplace if they have to navigate a maze of different privacy regulations across all the jurisdictions that they may reach. So for all of these reasons, the United States is promoting global cooperation within the global CBPR forum. We established this forum, I mentioned already, in 2022 with 8 other partners in the Asia Pacific, Japan, Singapore, Korea, Canada, Australia, to name a few. We are working together to promote broader cooperation within the forum. So we'd love to be here today or be here during this conference to promote Indian industry and government cooperation in the forum to see how we can cooperate to ensure that our companies have the benefit of the digital economy and are ensuring privacy protections as they do business around the world. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, let me go to Vishal. Yeah.
So I actually wanted to sort of open up by talking about 3 important topics. I think the first one is, if you see the recent cybersecurity breaches which have been plaguing the global digital landscape, I think one theme which is coming out is that organizations have failed to control the rise of data and uncontrolled rise of data within the organizations, right? And in the hindsight, what they are realizing is that there should have been some clear established accountability and ownership in terms of policy pertaining to the life cycle of data, including archival and purging of information. And the aftermath of these breaches has been businesses and business owners taking serious ownership and inquiry into what is their role in handling the information and data in their organizations because of the lessons learned from these incidents and breaches that have happened. So one of the things which I think is very, very important to understand is that with the rise of these regulations and expectations, I think one important change that we need to drive within organization is to bring in clear business ownership and therefore accountability in terms of managing data within the organization, which will go a long way in addressing the fundamental problem of why the data ownership is falling in no man's land. So that's the first piece which I want to talk about. The second piece which I want to talk about is the relationship between the cyber security and the privacy expectations from policy and implementation point of view. And I think it's a very interesting topic. We have had many conversations and many discussions around that. But I think it's very important to understand what is the resonance and what is the balance that needs to be brought about, because it is not a topic should be brushed under the carpet, but more in terms of having more transparent conversations, defining the roles and responsibilities. But more importantly, what we have seen work very successfully in organization is to segregate the role of defining policies and the role of execution and making sure those policies get implemented. And by and large, if I have to make a very generalized way of classification, I would say that the policy part is something which is driven through privacy, and the implementation part and execution part which is driven through the cybersecurity teams, right? And the third important aspect which I want to talk about is the advent of privacy regulations which are happening, and the amount of impact it not only has in terms of the overall understanding and implementation of protecting the personal identifiable information of common citizens and common citizens' data given to the service providers and establishments who are in possession of that and managing and using it and manipulating it as well. I think the other aspect is in terms of the definitely intended outcomes of how it improves overall maturity and capacity of overall cybersecurity in a given nation or a given organization. So we have seen examples in North America, in Europe, where privacy regulations have created a very significant positive impact on overall maturity of cybersecurity in those organizations. We only wish that it is not just privacy, but so many other factors which can drive the holistic deployment of cybersecurity within organizations, but this is nevertheless a great start. So these are three important points that I think I wanted to just talk about as to how it is, privacy is going to shape the future.
Thank you, Vishal, putting forward these 3 points. And as a Chief Privacy Officer, I would like Srinivas to dwell into the relation of privacy to the core of business.
Sure. Thank you, Vinayak, for having me here in the DSCI annual event. So we have actually come a long way in terms of our understanding of privacy, what it was. Traditionally, we were all used to looking at the perspectives about the harm caused from leakage of data, which could potentially cause embarrassment in the form of public disclosure of private facts. It could be financial data, which could lead to subsequent loss of credit card information, theft, all that kind of stuff which we are used to. And it's a very important part of privacy, which we continue to respect today. Organizations have to protect data. But with today's world, this is completely transforming. There's a big augmentation happening. As we engage in digital society, we constantly leave digital footprints in the cyberspace, which potentially can be gleaned together to draw rich profile about ourselves. These information which is available could potentially harm us or sometimes benefit us, of course, depending on how you look at it and what the company decides to do. But the main concern we have to be worried about is, do we have a say in that and do we have a choice? And that's how the regulations are coming up, which will make organizations accountable to provide choices as much as possible and to enforce those choices that the companies have to respect whatever people have chosen. Now, if you look at the new kinds of harms that we are seeing in the digital world are not what we spoke, but are related to decisional autonomy, are related to psychological aspects, what we call as due to constant surveillance, for instance, Hawthorne effect, where you, and that's triggered also because of work from home, which forced people to work remotely, and there's a pressure coming up from some companies and people to say that, hey, you have to be surveilled, you have to monitor what if there's a stealing of data, or are you working enough? And all those aspects lead to psychological distress due to which you don't behave normally. You then behave as the person on the other side wants you to behave. On decisional autonomy, I can give an example. The other day, I was in Hyderabad and I was wanting to get one of my walls painted in one of the rooms. So I called the service provider and asked how much it would cost to repaint the wall. Instead of telling the number, they asked me, where do you live? Now this is where I live related to the pricing. So we are used to this pricing based on what you can pay rather than what it costs. It's not new. This concept is not new, and it is part of economics. It's perfectly legal. And we, in the physical world, used to decide how to position ourselves to say where we come from, where we live, and had a control on the pricing. But in the digital world, that's disappeared. Because when you online go for pricing, the guy there, the other side, already knows about your profile, where you come from, what your status of desperation, which can actually decide the pricing. Similarly, you can have the data collected from various smartphones, etc., which can figure out how desperate you are. So all these aspects leads us to the conclusion that there is a very disproportionate asymmetry between we as consumers or citizens and the corporations which actually collect the data. Corporation could be private, public, we don't know. But the very fact that the data is available and the potential exists today because of high computing powers causes a nightmare for me, because I lost control. I feel that I'm no longer in my control, and there is somebody who's affecting me. There are filter bubbles, they're constantly hyper nudging, which leads me to believe what I need to do. For instance, in one of the Scandinavian countries, the government agencies fined or enforcement actions has been initiated. For what? For using algorithmic processing and collecting data to decide which individuals to go after on income tax evasion. It was just scrutiny. It was not about penalizing. The scrutiny itself led to a big, this thing, and GDPR actually related issued enforcement action. So imagine the kind of world we live in and what can happen. So we have to be very careful to maintain that harmony between the empowerment has to be to the citizen, data privacy is about people, and, and as much as possible, Vinayak, the question that we asked is,
Yeah.
we should use technology in the architecture. Since the topic is about that, we should, while administrative procedures, rules will exist, increasingly we should adopt technological safeguards to build privacy by design, which will not give much leeway for companies to circumvent these and exploit data. More when we...
Yeah, so as we are with you, Srinivas, one thing which I would like to ask you, and then I'll come to Shannon and Vishal. So the expectations of privacy is also moving field, right? So, for example, we in India talked about right to nominate, right? Some other countries. So the relation between what you are trying to do with data and the concerns of privacy evolving and the expectations are coming in basically, right? So, so this process is largely coming from the use of data, right? After me, also my data can be used, and that's why right to nominate has come. So, what are other things that you see, and how the relation between, because as a part of digitization, we always look at data for initial purposes, and then we find that we can use it for this purpose as well, right? And then that creates a challenge, where consent could be one way, but there are many other expectations of privacy subject matters which are evolved like a right to nominate, basically. So that relation between possible use for data and possible business case for data and translating that or converting or probably people raising concerns and translating that into privacy subject matter expert. So can you just dwell that in more?
Yeah, this is constantly changing. If you ask me this question 6 months later, the answer will be different.
Yeah.
On the nomination part, it's very important. I think it's coming more from the perspective of not what will happen. Will I be worried about after I die? What will happen to my day? We don't even exist, so we don't even know what happens after life. Yeah. But it's more about the family members, the people who are around.
Yeah.
A lot of data about me has my family members together with them, who are still around. And there could be private matters within my family which if accessed by somebody could cause problem. And I think that's where the angle is coming from, where we want to make sure that we have a right to privacy even after we are no more.
Yeah.
Right? That's very important and very, very forward-thinking thing which brought up in Indian law, I say. A few countries have that. On the newer aspects, yes, I think as we move forward, we see newer use cases coming up, which we never thought through. For instance, drones were not there before. We used to think that if you lie down in our backyard, we do whatever nobody can see. Today, we don't know. There are some cases around that where drones took photographs. We have these use cases on AI coming up, right? We have, so constantly newer use cases will be coming up which find innovative ways, for instance, use of AI in various use cases, right? So I think our role would be to proactively, instead of burdening the regulation and trying to define all these use cases. There are plenty of them. For instance, in the ISO standard committee, we looked at plenty of them. But we felt that we should leave these at a high level and define, not even attempt to define harm, but try to use the risk approach to say that people have to assess these risks and then accordingly take necessary technological measures, mostly, in build privacy by design, by which you can counter them. So I think that's the angle in which I would suggest.
So Shannon, because you look at the international cooperation for privacy, and there are a lot of these nuances in different geography comes into picture, right? And so, for example, we have a particular expectation, like subject matters of privacy. There may be some other geography has some separate expectation of privacy, way people use digitization and where the challenges are seen. So how that if you have to really make sure that because one part of digitization is your ability to work in a global geography as well, because digital means is also global means. Because of digital, it's very easy for you to participate in global economic activities basically, right? So these nuances on one hand, and these kind of divergent approaches on other hand, and on the second hand, there are still some of the expectation of privacy needs to be adhered in the global ecosystem basically. So there are different various approaches, but how it can cope up with this kind of evaluations happening.
So thanks for the question. We have noticed, I'd say, sort of two defining characteristics of our engagement in this space. One is, as you note, the significant divergence among how different countries approach these issues based on different histories and values and cultures. But the flip side of that is we also recognize a significant amount of commonalities. And how you get to those commonalities is by defining and agreeing on principles, high-level principles that that are reflected in all of our laws that have been around for decades, starting back when we first started having these conversations in the 70s and the 80s, and we first realized that data privacy was an issue as digital technologies started advancing, computers and that sort of thing. So the news is both good and bad. But I wanted to pick up a little bit on what Srinivas was mentioning about a risk-based approach. I think that you have to build on the commonalities in sort of a principle base. You have to avoid being too prescriptive to ensure that you don't encounter the problems that you mentioned. You can't foresee all the uses. You can't foresee all of the issues or the technologies that you might develop. You have to build enough specifics and commonalities to have a workable system, but to leave some flexibility. And I think that is the approach that we are promoting in the forum. We want to build consensus around commonalities, but build that based on flexibility, not being too prescriptive, being able to accommodate the differences. And I think that's going to be important, both in terms of establishing cooperation, but also promoting innovation and ensuring that we still are realizing the benefits that our digital technologies are promising for us. So,
Yeah.
So Vinayak, I just want to add to that. One of the examples also relevant would be why we should not be rigid. If you look at, we used to think that data that is available in the public domain is free.
Yeah.
Most laws exempt them, right? Now, after the Clearview breach which happened, there's a big news everywhere, right, last 1 year, where there is a reverse algorithmic way to figure out, by uploading a photograph, you can tell who this individual is and where the individual figured out in which photographs.
Yeah.
Now, that opens up our eyes now. And with algorithmic use of public scraping, so we have a huge problem. We have to upgrade ourselves and say that probably data can be used as long as you view it, you can look at it, you can probably save a copy, but can you subject to algorithmic use? No. Because so algorithmic processing led us to this new use case by which you can look at a photograph and you can figure out where you were in the world in last year. You were in Delhi, previously you were into vacation.
Yeah.
And these are all photographs which you didn't upload. Just like a Truecaller example, right? You didn't give the data to Truecaller. Truecaller took it from my neighbor's phone, my spouse's phone. So like that, these photographs are appearing in all public domain photographs. They can figure out. So this is now big concern, because now I cannot go back. I have to exercise right to be forgotten possibly. It's prohibitively expensive to do that. So in future, if somebody photographs me on the street, I will have to be careful, object to them. Today we don't worry because we have natural anonymity because of the crowd. That anonymity in the crowd is disappearing because of the technology. So we need to constantly rethink about how we define these principles.
So Vishal, the expectations of privacy, for example, if you are doing one transaction involving data, it has to satisfy the different subject matters and expectations of privacy. But organization does millions of them, right? And the pace at which you have been scaling up the transaction processing and collection of data, right? And also in the organization, different diverse way of using data is also there. underlying infrastructure is very complex as well, right? So what role, one certainly whatever you build, the architecture you can build privacy centric, but what role the technology can play to look at this volume, velocity, diversity, and heterogeneity that we see in organizational ecosystem?
Yeah, I think this problem is solved even at scale, um, very, I won't say easily, but, reasonably easy for the structured data, right? And anything which is there in a structured applications, business processes, once you've kind of deployed controls, you can deploy that controls and they will work at scale, right? I think the challenge is when you have unknown or hidden or shadow processes and unstructured data, which is hoarded by business users, uh, sometimes with your knowledge and most of the times without your knowledge, where it not only creates a challenge for the DPO, but it also is a technology challenge because you need to find a technology solution to that. So Srini talked about how technology is creating a challenge of things which were earlier not so much a problem. Now with technology, it is now becoming a real cybersecurity problem. Similarly, you can apply that even for the solutions, right? So how do we now put more technology to solve these problems which are get created? So it's like technology feeding into that, right? So I think the thing that I can, Shri, with your permission, I can talk about how we deployed it in our roles in Infosys, right? And I think we were very clear. So Srini made a very clear list of requirements that were there applying to different processes, different applications, different systems, different businesses, and laid out those requirements in terms of policies and frameworks to the cyber team, right? And then the cybersecurity team methodically went through each of those expectations and looked at the applicable security controls, right, which were there and how they would be applied so that we can comply to those expectations. It could be in terms of encryption into the databases, or it could be in terms of rights management for unstructured data creation and modification and data classification, or it could be in terms of masking, and it could also be in terms of how you can automate, mass data deletion and archival, and so on and so forth. And eventually, obviously, there were certain things which IT enabled in terms of building systems and processes to bring in more accountability in terms of data collection, data visibility, and application of policy, and also collecting consent from our employees, right, within applications. So I guess that is the methodical way in terms of dealing with, how technology and essentially cybersecurity can play a role in terms of implementing those policies.
So we have some time. Anybody has any questions so that I would try to get you as well in the conversation. Any question from the audience? I would certainly then go to the next level of question. So the core of business, right? And most of the businesses are telling that is unbundling. So what it is happening, like if I am a transaction processing business, especially in India and many other part of globe, right from initiating the transaction to processing transaction and sometimes enrichment of the transaction and even managing data out of transaction as well. So there's a lot of new players, third parties, startups, fintechs, those come into picture basically, right? So the core of business is also getting unbundled and there are a lot of those solutions, interfaces, third party come into picture. And one of the key thing we rely on third parties, especially the innovation side, we say that they are enriching our transaction. So this enrichment is a key word Srinivas here, and I'll also try to take it from Shannon as well. So enrichment means it's not your data. Somebody else is giving you data to enrich your transaction basically. Maybe a bank is saying that I can approve the loan in 5 minutes, means there's a data that they get and somebody is giving that data, they're enriching the transaction and that's why the loan application can be passed And there are a lot of recently mapped insurance company for 150 use cases. Most of them are done by some of the fintech organizations, basically. So this enrichment for the core, and because that's what the core get scaled up, there the lot of challenges comes, and what kind of expectation and how exactly we make sure that you bring privacy to that enrichment process.
They, they could be joint controller,
Yeah.
joint fiduciary in our context. There's also debate going on, whether who is processor, who is controller, it will emerge out. But if they are joint controller, they take liability. Otherwise, if they are processor, then we need to see that we take accountability and we transfer those liabilities to them. And so just merely having them collect the data doesn't absolve the responsibility on us. They have to, we contractually put these provisions that the processor takes liability, but in reality, if when it's proved tomorrow that they did on behalf of our advice, then actually we tend to become controller. So our mechanisms on these should be based on, if we become controller, obviously we need to do assessment privacy. We have to involve them in our privacy impact assessment and see that they right in the entire data life cycle, they do what we were supposed to do. Just because they're another company doesn't make any difference to us. And it also is requiring audits and verification, validation of the technology that they're using, whether it's APIs or some other method of data transfers. All that has to be happening, and then we take periodic audits are done to ensure the accountability is properly managed. That's how we put it.
Yeah.
I
Yes,
just,
Vishal.
just wanted to give my 2 cents on that. See, I think this problem is beautifully solved in the PCI DSS and payment card industry world, right? Because if you look at banks, most of the added transactions, right, EMI calculation and processing and card issuance, is traditionally been outsourced, right? But banks are still custodians and therefore controller of the data, because they have, the customers have shared that information with them. They don't care what you outsource and why you outsource, right? But the reality is banking industry works that way, right? So I think the overall ownership of what do banks do, what is the role and responsibility of merchants, what is the role and responsibility of the application provider which is processing that data, has been clearly defined and accountability established in the PCI DSS world. I think we need to apply some similar models, and I think Srini was talking about that. I think the similar models where the controller still takes the ownership, because especially when the outsourcing and the value-added services is completely opaque to the customer, you will continue to have that ownership and accountability of the data, and you therefore need to enforce the controls that you need to enforce on making sure that that information achieves the degree of privacy that is required by law, as well as by standard best practices.
So Shannon, I want to definitely, but I'd like to little bit contextualize for you this question is, so the data flow is happen across the border because you add value. You enrich that transaction because of the capability that you have, either technology or services you have, right? And sometimes while adding value, you also add some purpose as well, right? And one part of the question is the relation, the traditional relation of controller processor. Uh, uh, would it really, does it really cover all the possible way that people are adding value? One part is that, and secondly, against such kind of reality where it is sometimes very difficult to determine whether this entity works as a controller or processor, how do you make sure that some trust mechanism can be built so that for the role that you play in transaction, you are responsible and you are certified, you are in a way assessed for that, right?
Yeah, so actually one of our primary objectives within the Global CBPR Forum is in fact to launch a global CBPR certification. And we are poised to launch this system early next year. And that system is to establish just the type of accountability that we're talking about. When you're working with partners, domestically, overseas, how do you know that they're accountable? How do you know that they have practices that correspond with your legal obligations? That is exactly the kind of tool that we are establishing that is to be utilized globally and across different jurisdictions. We also, so there's the CBPR certification for controllers. We also have a related data processors certification where controllers maintain responsibility, but they can verify that the data processors that they're doing business with that are processing the data for the controllers on their behalf are doing so in a manner that allows the controller to still meet their legal obligations. And this is really important. We hear a lot from US companies. Some of our big multinational companies have hundreds or thousands of vendors that they're doing business with. How do you ensure that each of those other counterparts is accountable? And that process, if you're doing it individually on a transaction by transaction basis, is extremely onerous and costly. And I'm sure I don't have to tell these gentlemen about that. So to the extent we can provide tools that establish trusted partners, that establish accountability, both from the controller side, I know who I'm doing business with, I know they're trustworthy, they have a certification, they've been verified, but also from the vendor. I can show you my customers, my clients, and I'm trusted. And I think that's going to be increasingly important as the digital economy does open up, you know, new players in the market. How do you know, how do you identify and establish accountability?
And Vinayak, one of the things that criteria we use for deciding whether some processor is a controller or processor is this, that if they add value to themselves with the data they use from us and many other controllers, they become a controller themselves.
Yeah,
so
but see,
there is a,
my
and
only-
most of them refrain from getting into the territory because of liability, unless there is significant value.
Yeah, so one challenge in that, right, in the B2B example, right, sometimes you may not have direct relation with end consumer, still you add value. And then expectation that you have in terms of choice or consent, sometimes it becomes very difficult for you to satisfy those expectations basically. And that's true because I'm asking this from the perspective of our BPO industry for that matter, or for that matter any fintech adding value basically, right? So while we know the core is evolving, but the core itself is now becoming so, business core is becoming so disaggregated. So much entities are now, and I'm now seeing other side now, because there is obligation now, whatever benefit we created for the small companies to the big companies to participate in digital transaction processing, and through that earn good value, and at the same time create a job opportunity in country like India. So these obligation, which is stringent obligation on other side, I'm seeing some of the conversation in Indian ecosystem now. They are trying to say now probably we may like to do things in-house. We'll do it ourselves basically. So how do look at that part basically?
Yeah, so I think that that's a value judgment one has to make in terms of is the ROI that you get, is it worth to eliminate the need for processors, and then you take it up. So I think it's each company has to decide based on the value chain in my view.
Yeah.
But you're not referring to consent manager, I hope.
I'm not looking only consent. I'm talking about now all this obligation I have to manage. So until now, I was okay to unbundle it and get it some people to work with me. But now because of this obligation, which I also want you to reflect on, because all this obligation now better do in-house.
So the way to look at it is that you unbundle or bundle, but you tightly a bundle. Okay, so what I mean by that is you might still want to take a situation where you look at guardrails, and the guardrails could be that I may be doing offshoring, but the data does not move out of my data center, right? So you are people who are remote, who are processing your data, they are still processing in your, which is under your control and therefore under your jurisdiction, and all the controls are in your domain, and so you are responsible anyway, right? That is one example. Another example could be that you only allow the data to be value added for that period of time, and the moment the utility is completed, you delete it in real time, right? So you provide the feedback, you processed it, you've given it back to the controller, and it does not have any traces in your organization in real time. And you build system which can achieve that. So some of these examples are there where you could put some guardrails and controls by which you can achieve those controls.
Yeah. So one last question to each of you, one brief answer to that question to conclude in a time. So if you define the digital business, right, or digital enterprise, so you have some initial idea or problem statement and you think about some data that can solve that problem. So you build some application, you collect data, you do operations, and you reach to some level. And after that, what happens that you realize that this data is now, once you reach to critical level, this data can feed to this new idea, can look at some new problem to solve as well, right? And then you think about, then I can build the API basically, right? And or I can find a ways to give the data to other parties and they can work on top of it basically. And entire the India's digital DPI story is a so many APIs of different government organization that's there, and you can work on top of it basically, right? And that's what the digital enterprise is. So eventually you will find another use case, another idea, another way to do this basically. So in this API-driven economy, my question and this brief answer from each of you, how do you make sure that privacy also taken care of, the way the APIs, the kind of a speed at which the API has been accessed and at which the business are flourish on top of it basically. Who would like to? Srinivas briefly and then I will ask each of them.
Yeah, so I think this doesn't change the basic compliance to the principles which exist. Only an issue is when you process for a new purpose, you have to see that the new purpose is compatible to the original purpose. Doesn't have to be the same, it can be different, but as long as it's compatible. If not, you have to get back to users and take their consent. What happens if you can think of, suppose the use case is such that you can do away by anonymizing, or not anonymizing, maybe pseudonymizing, and keep the key secure. Maybe we can look at those ways by which you can exploit or generate value. I should not say exploit. So those are so using technology, you could probably avoid the burden of going to data subjects and asking them to.
Yeah.
And in the Indian context, we have to see how this evolves. This voluntary consent, voluntary notice, right? All that legitimate use.
Yeah.
So that how it shapes up. Where if I didn't object, it's fine. Those implications are to be seen because it looks very unusual to me, and I see difficulties in enforcement. But before that, this is the way it was. The world was going.
Yeah, Vishal, you want to add something on this? So.
Yeah, so I think we have been talking about secure by design, right? So I think now the world also needs to talk about privacy by design, right? So I don't think we have a problem in technology. There is enough amount of technology, architectural construct available to ensure that we can have a thriving API economy without sharing personal identifiable information. There could be a very secure and private exchange of information and business can happen. All it takes is a good architecture and a good construct of privacy by design, while we are also talking about secure by design. So we all know how hard secure by design journey has been. So I just hope that we have learned our lessons and we don't repeat the same and don't make the same hard journey for privacy by design. But I don't think the problem is a technology issue anymore. It is solved.
So Shannon, on assurance side, can that assurance be come to the level of API being assessed or certified, or it is always a enterprise level assessment happens?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what it comes down here to is establishing accountability by having enterprises verify, demonstrate to independent third parties that they are, in fact, doing what they say they're doing. They're following the rules. And in terms of how do you establish assurance of this globally, I think creating a network, an architecture, if you will, where governments and regulators and this whole system agree on that, that we can then operate in this trusted environment based on accountability and trust. So,
Thank you. And with this, I would like to conclude, but thank you, Srinivas, thank you, Vishal, and thank you, Shannon, for helping us to unveil the role of privacy in upcoming digital business. Please join me to give a big hand to all my panelists here to help us understand this better.
Thank you so much. We have tokens of our appreciation coming out to all of you. That session raised significant points on how privacy expectations are constantly evolving, simultaneously requiring businesses and organizations to improve their privacy practices and also incorporate them into their core business processes, and the focus on use cases in the API-driven economy. So that entire range of figuring out what this landscape looks like. Thank you so much, panel, for that discussion.